All right, Cal and Baptist Church deacon training, really just doctrine training and teaching. We're going to cover the future. The future in regards to primarily Revelation 20 when it speaks of 1,000 years, the millennium. There are 4 views of the millennium. Let's talk about those now. First view is called historical premillennialism. This view holds that there is a literal 1,000 years. This is the beginning of the 1,000 years be Jesus Christ's kingdom. He will come back and establish it. He will come back pre-millennium. He will come back before the millennium begins. That's why it's called premillennialism. Historical meaning that this is really the earliest view of the church. The first century church fathers, Justin Martyr, Papias, these guys, they believed historical premillennialism. It also holds that there's really no distinction, if any, between Israel and the church, that the promises made to Israel are fulfilled in the future in the church. And historical premillennialism also holds that the church will go through the tribulation. The tribulation period being that 7 years before the millennial kingdom is established, the church will go through that. And so this will begin post-tribulation, after the tribulation. The church will be here for that. Next view is amillennialism. Meaning no, as in a theist, and put an A in front of it, you get atheist. No God, I don't believe in no God. I do believe in God. Anyway, millennialism. That would hold that there is no millennium, per se. It's figurative language. They would say when the scriptures speak about 1,000 years in Revelation 20, it's speaking figuratively. It would quote Psalm 50:10, where it talks about God owning a cattle on 1,000 hills. They would say, well, look, it doesn't actually mean you could go out and count 1,000 hills. It's just talking about God owns all of them, or many hills. And they would say, well, that's what this is talking about in Revelation 20. It's not literally 1,000 years, just many years. They would say that the kingdom is going on right now, that after Jesus Christ was crucified and ascended, that he went to go establish his kingdom. It's going on right now. It's in heaven. And Revelation 20 is speaking about the present, the present right now. So while we're living right now, Revelation 20 is going on. Historic premillennialism would say, no, it's the future. Revelation 20 is future. Amillennialism would say that Revelation 20 is happening right now. Now, I didn't want to give a bunch of verses for each one of these views. I just primarily wanted to present them, but I do want to speak about a few things. One of the verses that are reasons I think that this is a very weak view is in Revelation 20. It speaks about Satan being bound. Now, I just have a hard time believing that right now Satan is bound and not deceiving the nations, right? And amillennialism would say, no, he is bound, that he's been limited. But if you look at the language in Revelation 20, he's chained, he's not deceiving anyone. And so they would say, no, he's actually just limited in how much he can deceive people. I just don't believe that. I think that Paul speaks about the God of this world deceiving people. So Satan's not bound. All right. One other thing is that if you've ever seen the movie The Kingdom of Heaven, that is a movie that's, people argue how historically accurate it presents the Christian side of the Crusades. And it's probably a little politically correct. However, one of the things that I know is accurate is that the Crusades and whatnot, these wars called on by the Catholic Church, were justified by this viewpoint. Why do I say that? Well, in John 18:36, let me back up. This is the official view of the Roman Catholic Church. All right, there was a church council, I believe in 381, actually, established that you have to believe this way on millennialism. Now, let me back up a little further. There's no millennium. It's going on now. Could go on 1,000 millions of years. It's going on now, and who knows how long it's going to be. After this time period's up, then Christ will return to bring in eternity. All right? Historic premillennialism know that Jesus Christ returns to set up the millennial kingdom, and then after that 1,000 years is finished, eternity eternity starts. All right? Millennialism would say, no, this 1,000 years is taking place now. Revelation 20 is taking now. Whenever that's finished, Christ will return to usher in eternity. All right. John 18:36, Jesus says to Pontius Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, my servants would fight. Because he's saying, my kingdom is not now. Now, the Roman Catholic Church would say, well, see, he was saying that if his kingdom was going on now, he would be fighting. And so whenever he was crucified and ascended into heaven and established his kingdom, it's okay to fight now. And so that was a lot of the medieval justification for spreading Christianity by the sword. Because if my kingdom were now, my servants would fight. Well, it is now, and so that's how they justified, demanding people be baptized, or they would, in many cases, kill them. And so that's amillennialism. It is the Roman Catholic view. It says there is no millennium. Specifically, at this kingdom, Revelation 20, which speaking of, is going on right now. And once its time period is finished, whenever that is, Christ will return to usher in eternity. It would also claim that Satan is bound right now. Again, I just don't believe that. So, next view. And I was going to try to not reveal what I believe, but I can't help it now. So, next view is postmillennialism. This would say that Jesus Christ, there is a literal 1,000 years, and Jesus Christ will return physically after that 1,000 years to usher in eternity. So he's not physically here. The millennium that's spoken of in Revelation 20 will be brought on because the church is going to spread the gospel and make everything better on earth. And everything is going to progress. And so we're going to get this 1,000 years of peace. And once that 1,000 years is finished, Christ will return. I put a question mark here because I don't really know any sort of scriptural evidence for this. I can't really find any. In fact, I know Paul says evil men will wax worse and worse. And so, again, I don't see how someone could hold that the world is going to get better and better and better, and that's going to bring in this Christianized time of 1,000 years, Christianized time of peace for 1,000 years. This was popular around the turn of the century, the 1800s to the 1900s, when there was many advances in science, inventions that had taken place. People were kind of feeling that the world's progressing and going in the right direction. Then you had World War II happen. World War I happened, World War II, and it's kind of declined in popularity, this viewpoint. So, but anyways, it's postmillennialism that would say that Jesus Christ comes back after the millennium to usher in eternity, and the 1,000 years of the kingdom is established by the church. It's going to make everything in the world peaceful. All right, the final view is dispensational premillennialism. It also, like historical premillennialism, believes that there's 1,000 years spoken of in Revelation 20 is literally 1,000 years. Jesus Christ will bodily, physically reign on earth for 1,000 years. He will come back to establish this. He will come back before the millennium begins, so premillennialism. However, dispensational premillennialism would hold that the rapture occurs before the tribulation. That's 7 years before the millennium. The church is taken out at the beginning of that tribulation. 7 years takes place, and then Jesus Christ returns with his church to establish the millennial kingdom. Historic would say, no, the church goes through that 7-year tribulation. Dispensational premillennialism would say, no, the church is raptured out at the beginning. Also, another difference between this and historical premillennialism is that dispensational premillennialism would believe that the promises made to Israel in the Old Testament are going to be fulfilled with Israel. They're going to be kept. It's going to be these promises made to Israel, and the Jews will be fulfilled with the Jews only, not the churches. And another way to put it is there's a sharp distinction between Israel and the church. Historical premillennialism would say that there is not really a distinction. And dispensational premillennialism would say, no, there is. And also, it's pre-tribulation. To give you another movie reference, this would be the movies Left Behind, the books Left Behind. All those are written from a dispensational premillennial viewpoint. So Kingdom of Heaven, amillennialism, dispensational premillennialism, Left Behind. Again, just because it's a bad movie doesn't mean it's bad theology. All right? I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I don't want to offend you, but you know what I'm saying. Anyways. So, in review, historical premillennialism. And actually, this would say that Jesus Christ returns after the tribulation to set up his kingdom for 1,000 years, a literal 1,000 years. He returns before it begins, premillennialism. And it's post-tribulational. Amillennialism believes that there is no millennium. It's actually taking place right now, but it's for a long period of time. Could be millions of years. After the end of it, Christ will return to usher in eternity. This is the view of the Roman Catholic Church. And it's also a view that's used to justify, at least in the past, spreading Christianity with the sword. Postmillennialism, everything's going to get better because the church is going to Christianize, spread the gospel, and it's going to usher in 1,000 years of peace. Christ won't be here ruling physically, but he will be here in spirit. Then at the end of that 1,000 years that's brought on by the church, he'll return to usher in eternity. Dispensational premillennialism is similar to historical premillennialism in saying that it's a literal 1,000 years. Jesus Christ will return at the beginning of it to usher it in, to establish it. However, this viewpoint is pre-tribulation. And so at the beginning, that 7 years before the millennium, Jesus Christ will rapture out his church before the tribulation occurs. And then at the end of that 7 years, he will return with his church to establish his kingdom, or the millennium, 1,000 years spoken of in Revelation 20. Another major difference between this and historical premillennialism is that there is a sharp distinction between Israel and the church. The promises made to Israel are going to be kept and given and made and fulfilled through Israel. All promises made to Abraham about his descendants, those will be given to Israel. This is a viewpoint that, again, I generally hold. One of the strongest arguments for this viewpoint is, and I'll sort of close with this idea that you had to have Israel had to be a nation again, had to be established. And so for however many 2,000 years, generally speaking, you had these other viewpoints, and when this one came on the scene, many people were saying, how can this be true? There is no Israel. People held this dispensational viewpoint, but it wasn't really popular. It wasn't really part of the Christian writing and whatnot until the late 1700s. And so back then, people were saying it's impossible. There's no Israel. There's no, how we know who the Jews are. What are the Jews going to do? They're going to go back to establish their nation again? That's impossible. It's not going to happen. Well, it did in 1947. And so, and they, those that were holding this viewpoint had been saying it all along. Israel will become a nation again. God has promises he's made to them. He will keep them. And so for me, that's one of the strongest arguments. We saw, our recent history saw what this viewpoint prophesied come true in an amazing way. So that's the viewpoints of the future. Now, one more statement about this. The future and what you believe about the future, it's good to know the different viewpoints, but I would say this doctrine is a near essential. It's not an essential. We wouldn't disfellowship or not allow someone to teach be in a teaching role in our church if they held a viewpoint different from the majority of our church, which I believe, I should probably say that, is one of these viewpoints, premillennialism. That the millennium is future. Revelation 20 is future. Someone held a different viewpoint, no one's going to say you can't teach that or you need to leave the church. I might say don't teach that, but it's not an essential like gospel, salvation by faith or the deity of Christ, the Trinity. I believe, however, that there is something that the other viewpoints lack an urgency to spread the gospel because the return of Christ is not imminent, especially in postmillennialism. The return of Christ really is at any time. It is imminent with either one of the premillennial viewpoints. And so I think it does affect your Christian walk and so in your walk as a disciple. I think this view does affect it. However, it's not an essential in saying that you're not, someone holding a different view would not be saved. So it's a near essential, but it's not an essential. All right, the future, thanks.